This presentation is on Ontario's declaration of emergency as a response to COVID-19. My thesis is, while both global and local emergency actions concerning COVID-19 have their benefits and drawbacks, Ontario's declaration of emergency infringes on the rights and freedoms of Ontarian citizens. Throughout this presentation, I will be looking at the effects of the declaration of emergency, both the good and bad effects. We are facing a global health crisis unlike any in the 75-year history of the United Nations, one that is killing people, spreading human suffering, and upending people's lives. But this is much more than a health crisis. It is a human, economic, and social crisis. This is an accurate summary made by a report from the UN about the coronavirus. What is COVID-19? COVID-19 is a new strain of the coronavirus and it is infecting people around the world. Strains of the coronavirus are very common and typically cause coughs and colds. However, in rare cases, they can also cause severe infections like SARS. In December 2019, there was a new coronavirus that came out. And people who got infected by this virus, there was a range of illness, and that illness you could get from the virus is called COVID-19, or Coronavirus Disease 2019. There are many signs and symptoms of COVID-19. They can range from mild to very severe. They can even be just like the flu. The most common symptoms of COVID-19 include fever, falling down often, extreme tiredness like fatigue, lack of energy, muscle aches, digestive issues including nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and stomach pain, pink eye in some cases, a headache that's unusual or long-lasting, lost sense of taste or smell, runny, stuffy, or congested nose, difficulty swallowing, sore throat, shortness of breath, a barking cough, or any regular cough that's new or worsening, chills, and a fever. Complications from COVID-19 can also include serious conditions. You can think of pneumonia or kidney failure, and even in some cases, death. There is currently no specific treatment for COVID-19, and there is no vaccine that protects against it. But most cases are mild and most people who get it will recover on their own. If you still want to get treatment for it, you can drink plenty of fluids, get as much rest and sleep as possible, or even use a humidifier or take a hot shower to help with a sore throat or cough. Some groups of people are higher at risk of getting COVID-19. These people include people who are 70 years or older, who are getting treatment that compromises their immune system like chemotherapy. They have a condition that also weakens their immune system, like any autoimmune disorder, or they have a chronic health condition like diabetes, asthma, or a heart condition, or people who just regularly go to a hospital or healthcare setting for treatment, like for surgery or for cancer treatment. To prevent getting coronavirus, you can physical distance, you can avoid contact, you can wash your hands often, don't touch your face, and self-isolate when you do see that you have symptoms. While the Government of Canada did not enact the Federal Emergency Measures Act, provinces and territories of Canada are taking measures to protect themselves. On March 17 of 2020, the Government of Ontario ordered a declaration of emergency under the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act in the whole province of Ontario. Because of this order, many establishments have been ordered to close, including all private schools, childcare centres, and many other establishments. Now, the Ontario government is beginning to open gradually, but with some restrictions. Even so, there is no guarantee that we will return to fully normal. While the declaration of emergency was enacted for the overall good of Ontarian citizens, not all the results have been beneficial. Some of the social, cultural, environmental, and economic results have been profitable, but many of the results have been harmful to Canadians. According to the United Nations, the COVID-19 outbreak affects all segments of the population and is particularly detrimental to members of those social groups in the most vulnerable situations, continues to affect populations including people living in poverty situations, older people, persons with disabilities, youth, and Indigenous people. Research suggests that those in lower economic strata are likelier to catch the disease, however. They are also likelier to die from it. And even for those who remain healthy, they are likely to suffer loss of income or health care because of quarantines, lockdowns, and other measures, potentially on a sweeping scale. Similarly, inequality can also be resulting and a multiplying effect of the coronavirus's spread and deadliness. Similar research on influenza has found that in an epidemic, poverty and inequality can exacerbate the rates of transmission and mortality for everyone. Should this pandemic be inappropriately addressed, the current social crisis can expand incredibly, increasing inequality, exclusion, discrimination, and global unemployment in the medium and long term. Many in society have a mental risk because of the virus. As one source put it, so suicide is likely to become a more pressing concern as the pandemic spreads and has longer-term effects on the general population, the economy, and vulnerable groups. Employment loss and financial stressors have been a result of COVID-19, and they are also well-recognized suicide factors. Similarly, other factors for suicide, like the inability to attend religious gatherings, interpersonal violence, domestic violence, alcohol and drug consumption, and access to means for suicide, may also increase during lockdown or isolation. Also, social isolation, entrapment, and loneliness help contribute to suicide risk. Isolation can lead to earlier death by 26%. Social isolation by 29%, and living alone by 32%. Humans need interaction and physical contact, so isolation is causing multiple negative social effects. There are also social recessions which have been linked to a variety of chronic diseases like cardiovascular function, blood pressure, heart rate, and circulating stress hormones, even cellular aging. Ontarian culture has also been harmed by this pandemic. For many, there has been a huge loss of revenue, but also cultural organizations like public museums, libraries, and theaters need public support and consistent revenue to stay afloat. However, they have not been receiving it. Other major multinational online companies like Netflix have benefited from the virus, but most have not. Having cultural and creative-based organizations temporarily closed has also affected job loss. Public gathering, tourist attractions, and cultural institutions are among the most riskiest places to be as the infection spreads, so all those cultural places have been closed. Culture is also changing on a normal, everyday level. The work-from-home lifestyle has had an effect on the workforce, the view of the handshake, and a likelihood of a greater propensity to physically distance oneself from others. Other changes include more online shopping and support of local businesses. In Ontario, there has been a large increase in local shopping, and the effect on tourism and cultural events is said to be devastating because of COVID-19. The environment has also been affected by local and global lockdown measures, even though many of the effects may not be permanent. There has been a 25% decrease in greenhouse emissions in parts of Asia, an accelerated healing of the ozone layer, and a stark drop in pollution. All these are benefits of the restrictions and lack of travel by many. For these temporary effects to be permanent, however, there must be a large adjustment in global restrictions and societal behavior when it comes to the environment. Global action, strong political will rolled out in an efficient and effective way, can be a very powerful game changer, according to one source. What is perhaps the strongest effects felt by the Declaration of Ontario is likely the economic impact. As a result of this declaration and its associated orders, many establishments were legally required to close immediately. All facilities providing indoor recreational programs had to close, as well as all public libraries, all private schools, all licensed child care centers, all bars and restaurants, all theaters, including those offering live performances, all cinemas, and concert venues. Ontario is also investing up to $304 million to enhance the province's response to COVID-19. This money is going towards increased capacity in hospitals, more testing and screening through public health, to further protect frontline workers, to support frontline workers, for long-term care homes, for residential facilities and developmental services, to protect seniors in retirement homes, and for Indigenous communities. As a result of this response to COVID-19 outbreak, the Ontario government is planning for a deficit of $20.5 billion in the years 2020 to 2021. Not only is the government losing money, but individual businesses are also suffering. Big companies like Hyundai and Apple are planning on seeing sales decreases because of a drop in the numbers of products manufactured, as the necessary parts have not come in as many numbers from China. Small businesses have also suffered. A report from the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses said that 80% of companies are completely or partially closed. Rent is the second highest cost after wages for these entrepreneurs, but with little to no money coming in, it's getting harder for them to pay their bills. Similarly, a survey by the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses found that 22% of its members had no income coming in, and half of them said they wouldn't survive another month. Even though we do have some statistics on the economic effects, it is unclear that Ontario has and will continue to be impacted. The extent of the full impact on the province remains uncertain. However, the Bank of Canada press release on March 13 stated, "It is clear that the spread of the coronavirus is having serious consequences for Canadian families and for Canada's economy." There are also other economic effects. Manufacturing activity has slowed. The unemployment rate has reached 13%. Oil prices have declined. The stock market has declined, reaching record lows. Government bond rates have lowered, and the Canadian dollar has declined. The reason Ontario is enduring all these negative and harmful impacts is for the protection and overall health and safety of Ontarians. While this large health benefit is not measurable, we are aware that the restrictions have greatly slowed the spread of COVID-19 and have saved many lives. So, is the declaration of emergency constitutional? For the declaration of emergency to be considered constitutional, it must be considered reasonably beneficial first. While a declaration of emergency may reasonably limit Canadian rights and freedoms, they are not supposed to dilute the Charter's requirements that limits on Canadians' rights and freedoms be reasonable, prescribed by law, and demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society under Section 1 of Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Even so, many emergency measures do limit Canadians' rights. Ontario's ban of unessential travel and ban of gatherings of more than 5 individuals limit the freedom of peaceful assembly in Section 2C, the right to move and take up residence in any province in Section 6(2)(a), and the freedom of conscience and religion in Section 2(a). Also, the use of mobile apps for the collection and use of personal information, and for quarantine enforcement and for disarm the right to be secure against any unreasonable search or seizure in Section 8. Although the declaration of emergency does limit the rights of Ontarians, it is only considered unconstitutional if the measures are not considered reasonable. As one source said, "These are no doubt very fearful times, but what we hope is not in the cards is the government invoking the notwithstanding clause in Section 33 of the Charter. That would mean that there are no restrictions on those governments that decide to enact laws and abolish our legal rights and fundamental freedoms. So let's not give COVID-19 virus that power. It is causing enough havoc. Let us not infect the rule of law." The Oak test is used to determine if a certain event or law brought to court or used by the government is constitutional and ethical, as the Constitution is based off of morals and ethics. According to the Oak's test, for any law, order, or declaration to be constitutional, it must meet 2 requirements. The first is that there must be a pressing and substantial objective for the law or government action. And as COVID-19 is a worldwide pandemic, it does meet this requirement. The second has 3 parts. The second is the means chosen to achieve the objective must be proportional to the burden on the rights of the claimant. The first part is the objectives must be reasonably and rationally connected to the limit on the Charter right, which is seen in how the government has limited the rights that are associated to the objective. The second part of it is that the limit must minimally impair the charter right. The way I see it, banning the gathering of more than 5 people largely impairs the Charter's right to the freedom of peaceful assembly, not minimally impairs it. Without limits, Ontarians would meet in larger numbers, even in thousands for certain events. Like the Pan Am Games hosted by Ontario, there attended over 250,000, and such gatherings then were still constitutional. Restricting gatherings to 5 people does not minimally impair this charter right. Similarly, banning all non-essential travel does not meet this requirement either. Neither does forbidding religious gatherings, even when done safely, like the small Church of Elmer, the Church of God, did. When the Church of God began to hold parking lot services over the radio with members in closed, separate vehicles, they were threatened with charges and forbidden to continue. It wasn't until the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms served a charter challenge against both the Elmer Police and Ontario that the order of organized public events and certain gatherings was modified to allow for such gatherings. The third part is that there should be an overall balance or proportionality between the benefits and limit and its deleterious effects. As of May 28, Canada had an estimated 182 deaths per 1 million people from COVID-19 in its population, which is relatively low, with the majority of the deaths from the elderly and those with pre-existing health conditions already. Even though that number is relatively low, the social, cultural, and economic harmfulness is large in comparison. COVID-19 has directly resulted in the deaths of 0.0182% of the population. The declaration of emergency has also resulted in further inequality, loss of income for many. It has resulted in isolation, loneliness, and greater suicide risk. It has resulted in devastating cultural effects. It has resulted in a 13% unemployment rate and a loss of almost 2 million jobs. It has resulted in 80% of small businesses being completely or partially closed, and many without any income. It has resulted in many people out of work and unable to pay their bills. The statistics suggest that the benefits and harmful effects of the declaration of emergency aren't balanced. They are largely imbalanced, with the harmful effects being much greater than the benefits. To make this declaration be considered constitutional, Ontario should begin to open up more quickly while still taking precautions against COVID-19. Similar to the way the declaration was changed regarding certain gatherings in response to the Church of God's actions, several subsections of the declaration of emergency should be modified. Businesses considered non-essential should be allowed to reopen with strict sanitation and health safety rules. Travel should be allowed once again. Travelers should be required to closely follow strict physical distancing and health guidelines. Churches in place of religion and worship should be allowed to gather in certain numbers, while physical distancing and taking all necessary safety precautions. These changes will still limit the Charter's rights and freedoms, but do so in a way that is acceptable, balanced, and minimally impairing on the rights and freedoms of Ontarians, in a way that meets the requirements of the Oakes test, making it constitutional. Laws, justice system structures and practices, legal precedents, and legislative agendas, like Ontario's declaration of emergency, need to change over time because society, the environment, the culture, and the economy change over time. Change is the only unchangeable thing, being, idea in the universe. To meet this change in an effective way, legal changes must be made. In this instance, COVID-19, a strain of the coronavirus, was the change. The world and Ontario needed temporary legal change to protect people from this pandemic. So, Ontario enacted its declaration of emergency to protect its citizens. In conclusion, while Ontario's declaration of emergency has its benefits in slowing the spread of COVID-19, it fails to protect and minimally impair the rights and freedoms of Canadians as outlined in the Charter. As a result of this declaration, the spread of COVID-19 has been slowed drastically, and many were able to be treated for it. However, this declaration has also resulted in isolation and loneliness for many, harmful mental and social effects, devastating cultural effects, the loss of many jobs, the closure of numerous businesses, and other adverse effects. The declaration of emergency must be modified for the good of Ontarian society as a whole. Thank you for watching, and here are my citations.